Hey everyone, welcome to the Third Coast Craftsman's Workshop. I'm Chris, this is Oots, and today we're going to be working on a through wedged mortise and tenon joint. Oots, squirrel! So I'm just going to start by cutting a tenon, and I'm going to cut these tenons by just removing the edge cheeks. I'm not going to cut face cheeks on these tenons. I want these tenons to be the full thickness of that sideboard. Now I'm going to lay out where I'm going to drill a relief hole so that when I cut the kerf and drive a wedge in later, the wood won't split down the sides. And you want these holes to be as close to the edge of your tenon as possible so that there's less risk of it breaking. So I'm going to start the saw kerf where the wedge gets driven in 1/4 inch from each side. My wedge will be 1/4 inch, and when I drive that wedge in, there'll be 1/4 inch of oak showing through the top, then 1/4 inch of the wedge, which is the darker Jara color, and then the rest of the tenon, and it'll look really good that way. Alright, I'm going to try to explain how to cut this joint real quick. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a ruler. I'm going to measure the distance between these tenons right here. And then I'm going to divide that distance by 2 and find the center of my top board and go out from that center line that distance. So then I'll have my overall distance when you add those two together. Then I'm going to take a caliper like this. You can do this other ways, but this is a really easy, quick, handy way. And then you measure the width of that tenon. Now I'll find my pencil line that I made and use my caliper and make a pencil line on the other side. Now I know the width of my mortise on the bottom. I'll kind of do that same process for the top, but what I'm doing this time is because these mortises, once the tenons, once the wedges get driven in them, are going to be shaped like a V. And I want my V to only go as wide as the width of these side pieces. So they're only going to be a slight angle, which is plenty. So what I'll do is now I'm going to measure the distance a little bit, not here between the tenons, but down a little bit farther between the side. Same thing, I'm going to take this number, divide it by 2, go up to the top, measure out from the center that distance, and now I know I have my width between here on the top, perfect. And I'm going to take my caliper again, measure the side pieces this time, not the tenon. We did the tenon the first time. This time we're doing the side pieces, and I'm going to transfer that width to the top. And then when you are chopping your mortise, make sure that, so you'll go from your top piece, which is wider, and you're going to cut at an angle down to meet the bottom piece. Then when you slide your tenon through, it'll be snug at the bottom and there'll be gaps at the top. When you drive your wedges in, it'll split that gap and have a nice tight joint. So take a lot of time with this joint. It's going to be very, very visible, so it really take your time. And measure like 3 or 4 times to make sure you got it right. All right, let's keep going. So what I'm going to do now to line up these through mortise and tenon joints on the top, set the top on the edge of the shelf like this. I'm going to line up the tenons that are coming through with the top because they're the exact same width. Then I'm going to make a mark. The inside, do it on both sides, and that's what I'll use to set my marking gauge. Now I'll take my marking gauge and line it up with that pencil mark that I just made. Now I know I'll have one side of my tenon, and then I will bring the other cutter on my mortising marking gauge over to get the exact thickness of those tenons. Will you get my mallet for me? Good boy. Thanks. Thanks, bud. So I helped myself out a little bit and drilled out the majority of the waste on the drill press. And now it's just time to chop out all these mortises. You have to be really careful, take your time, go really nice and slow, work right up to like a 1/16 or 30 seconds of your line before you do your final cut. Otherwise, you could move that knife line and you'll end up having gaps later on. So now I'm cutting out the wedges. I'm using Jara so that it'll have a nice contrasting color. It's really important to measure these things right. You want them to be a 1/4 inch wide when they're driven down all the way so that there's no gaps and that everything seats properly. So you need to take your time and make sure these are measured right. Now it's time for the moment of truth, the scariest part. You get some glue on it and you drive the wedges in and there's no turning back from here. So you hope everything's cut perfectly and there aren't going to be any gaps. And actually, they turned out really, really nice. I couldn't be happier. Be careful when you're driving these wedges in. You only want to go until all the gaps pretty much disappear, because if you keep pounding those wedges, you can split that entire piece of wood in half. Then I'll just take one of my Japanese saws, or if you have a flush cut saw, and cut off that portion that's sticking through the top. Then take some hand planes and some sandpaper or orbital sander and sand everything on the top nice and smooth. Wow, these things turned out beautiful. I couldn't be happier with how nice they turned out. And now I'm going to put some Danish oil on the top. This stuff is some of my favorite finishes to use and just makes the wood come to life. Just beautiful. Man, that is beautiful. Well everyone, thanks so much for stopping by and watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, think about subscribing and check the description for a couple other really cool videos related to this. Thanks.